So this session is about how to stay married. And of course, because we're talking about customers, of course I'm talking about how to stay married to your customers. For me, this journey and the insights I hope to share with you began one cold February day in the office. I remember it was cold. At the time I had two offices, one in Sunnyvale, California, where it's never cold, and the other was in Geneva, and it was a cold day, so I was definitely in Geneva. And what happened was, at the time, I was the head of customer experience for the corporation for HP's $4 billion software division, and the phone call was from the customer experience lead of a different division. And what he talked to me and wanted to tell me about was some pretty surprising stuff. And it was new, very surprising insights that at first I have to say I couldn't believe that came out of what was then an annual NPS benchmark research. Now, before I go on to talk about that in detail, I realized as I went through what everyone is going to speak about that I was going to be the only person who would actually use the term NPS benchmarks in a way that it's really important to, let's say, communicate what we mean by that. So, well, let's try it this way. All of you slept somewhere last night, though talking to some of the CustomerGauge people, I'm not quite certain that they actually managed the sleep part. All of you lay down on a bed. How far was that place where you slept or tried to sleep from here? Mine was 17. Yours might have been about 2.2. Right. But 17 what? And 2.2 what, right? 2.2 kilometers, 17 minutes. For people of my generation, let's see who else knows the answer in this room. What's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? 42. Of course, then there were 5 books written in the, as he called it, the increasingly inaptly named Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy, because 42 wasn't a benchmark and nobody knew what the 42 meant, right? So a benchmark, if you go and look at it in a dictionary, is a point of comparison. And for you to be able to use anything as a point of comparison, the thing that you are comparing with has to be measured in exactly the same way. So if we're going to talk about how far it is from where I slept and where you slept, we better understand whether we're talking about kilometers, miles, minutes, parsecs, whatever it is. Now, there is only one way that is accepted as being how you do NPS benchmarks that are truly comparable between companies, and I'll answer the question that was asked around comparisons with countries. So, Michael, I'll take the risk of giving the first answer, and that way, that'll bias you in favor of what I say. So the way that we did it at HP was called double-blind benchmarking. And we paid over the years Harris at first, because this started in Compaq when I was there, and then it was copied into HP. It was Harris, Qualtrics, Ipsos, and there was a fourth company, I can't remember. So double-blind means that the people who are answering the questions don't know who's asking them. And ideally, the people who are asking the questions, especially if it's done by phone or face-to-face, shouldn't know who's funding the research. You don't want this thing of, okay, well, what do you think of the great service from HP? And there is someone from IBM in the room. Who is it? At least I saw somebody on the list. Well, maybe you're ashamed. That's okay. And what about that crap stuff from IBM, right? Right? The point is, it's to remove bias, so that what you're looking at is completely comparable from one to the next. So we were funding that. It's not an inexpensive exercise, because in B2B, there are very few public sources of benchmark data, and you usually wind up having to fund research yourself. And it's not cheap. The research companies use panels. It turns out that they often use the same panels. And your tip of the day is, if you're doing double-blind research that uses panels, the most important thing is the quality of the panels. Whether the panel people are representative of your customers, and what that company's process is for taking people off the panels who give you crap responses. Like we would get in quite regularly, I won't mention Ipsos's name, the issue of people just hitting the keyboard and putting random letters into the comments field, and then Ipsos wouldn't screen them out, and they'd wind up in our data. And to me, I was saying, these are the people you need to throw off your panels. You're paying them money for nothing, right? So they use panels that need to be representative of your customer base, so you want to understand their job roles, whether they're decision makers, influencers, end users, and so on. In software, we covered 45 different competitors. So this was serious stuff, all with large volumes of responses. So let's get into the surprise, but first I'm going to show you to get HP's chief privacy officer to let me agree to show the data from the time. I had to agree to not say what the businesses were, right? So these are 9 different HP businesses, and these slides will all be on the website. 9 different HP businesses, and what this says is, for every 1 point improvement or decline in NPS, this was the effect on revenue. However, you see this second row called time lag, because depending on the nature of the business, there was a time lag in when the change in NPS had an effect on revenue. And you would expect this. Those of you who are in businesses that are dependent on annual or multi-year service contracts, and you should understand that these time lags are driven essentially by the procurement cycles. So if you've got a business like business G there that depends on multi-year service contracts, it's going to take a certain amount of time between when you're improving and when you're going to get the benefit of the improved renewals rates. The 2 businesses with the 0 time lag, well, there's really a 3-month time lag built into the research processes, were both consumer businesses. And frankly, even though I'm not able to say what businesses they were, it should be common sense to you that one inkjet printer is pretty much the same as the next. One Windows-based PC is pretty much the same as the next. So the impact of the improvements were relatively small, or declines, and the time lag was really short. Now, the most important single word on this slide is probably the word relative, which is why I've underlined it, right? If you improve, but your competitor improves more, you're going to lose out, right? So you're putting yourself in a very unfortunate position if you're going to go to your CEO and say, okay, yeah, fantastic, NPS rigorously measured in some nice satisfactory way, it's improved 5 points. And then the CEO says, well, why is our revenue flat? Why is competitor X eating our lunch? And unless you know what's happening with them, you don't have a good answer, right? So it's the relative movement. The classical NPS theory says that you should be measuring against your key competitor, We didn't do it that way. We did it against the average of all of the other competitors. Right? That's what that graph is. This was US only, as you see, 2002 to 2013. You're talking a number that's way above 300 billion. So these are big numbers. I'm talking in total, not per year. So these are big numbers, so the ROI, you can work this out yourself. Last remark I'll say is, and this is the answer to the DHL questions, there are huge cultural differences in the way people respond to NPS, to recommendation questions. Characterizing it, and this is what I was allowed to disclose publicly, even though it was covering multi-vendors for hardware and software businesses, as in one of my books, but the Mexicans and the Brazilians give really high answers. So DHL, get more answers from those Mexicans. And by the way, this is possibly why the Mexicans embraced the thing quickly, because they look better than everyone else. Now, is that true, Mikhail? Yeah. Well, there you go, right? And guess what? At the other end of the scale are the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians, and the Dutch, right? For almost everybody, your competition is exclusively local and you shouldn't compare with other countries. And if you're in a large multinational company and you're a customer experience leader, you must prevent your leadership trying to compare countries. You can't do it. The question in Australia isn't whether your trend is good or bad, it's whether it's better than your competitor's trend, right? Okay, that's enough on benchmarks. This is the first of two places where I'm going to pause, because this is the only slide with detail-y numbered things. Do you have any questions on what I've just said? It's fine if you don't. Fine, I'll keep going and we'll talk about the surprise. The surprise came when a very large business said, fine, we understand that, and yes, we've shown that the model makes sense. We've been through a particular period of time, it was a 3-year period of time, when that business had about a 15-point NPS decline. And revenue went down in the same way. It didn't go down 15 points, it went down approximately in line with the model that I just showed you, right? So the question that they were asking was, who's leaving? And the common sense, and what you get told in NPS theory consistently, is that your detractors are the risk. The surprise, and that I'm going to attempt to prove to you today, is that's wrong in business to business, and in any business, even a consumer business that depends on annual contract renewals. Right? So let's think about it. It was a cold February day. It happened to be Valentine's Day. And in most countries, if they're in Brazil, it's celebrated a different day in July and stuff like that. It's February the 14th. And that gave me the insight that I needed to understand what we were talking about. Think about the NPS category as the same way as you would think of the 3 categories of couples that you know. Right? I guarantee you all know couples like this. Even I do, and despite being on the stage, I'm an intense introvert and I don't like people generally. But I still know couples. I adore humanity, it's the people I can't stand. We all know couples who are deeply in love. They support each other, they've been together a long time. They're examples for all of us. These are the couples that correspond to, in the Net Promoter System, they correspond to the promoters. They're what I call the happy couples. They tend to stay together and they're references for us all, right? At the In the second category, we have the people who seem to fight a lot, right? So you go to some party that's organized at their house, and you see this couple, and they're bickering, and they're fighting, and they're annoying each other constantly. But then after a little while, yeah, you know, it was funny because I saw that just before, I'm not going to say what it is, but I only noticed it, cultural differences speaking, just before I got on stage. Like all these drawings, it's my brother who does all my drawings, so I'll blame him. So there are these couples, but that you all know. You may even be in one of these couples. But then when you think about it, you notice that they've been like that for years. But they're still together. And why is that? And the reason is they're communicating, right? So in Net Promoter terms, what you've got is these are the people who correspond to the detractors. They seem to fight a lot. These are your customers that seem to escalate a lot, right? Remember when, anybody here from the Czech Republic? When Jan Zadak was the head of HP for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, he just said to me, I love escalations. I said, what are you talking about? You know, this is my nightmare. And he said, the customers always end up buying more stuff, right? And the thing, particularly in quite male-dominated tech industries, it's something at the risk of sexist remark, it's something in the male nature to want to solve problems and to put out fires. I need a fire to put out. If there's a detractor, I'm going to run and I'm going to put out that fire, right? And I'm going to over-recover. I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep that customer with us. And that's where we tend to spend a hell of a lot of our attention. You know, we're not spending it with the happy couples. We're spending it with them to say, fine, you've said you would definitely recommend us. So let's talk about recording a customer reference video. You know, how do we act on that? You give the salespeople confidence and so on. Down at the other end, maybe you're losing margins. Well, you're certainly losing margins. You may be giving the people a discount. You may be giving them some stuff for free, right? However, there is a third category. So these are the couples in what I call the deadly zone of mutual indifference. I've been divorced just over 30 years ago. Let's see if you can recognize any of this. You know, I get home. I was living in the Netherlands at the time. Okay. I get home. There's Camilla. She's there. Camilla's not saying anything. Everything must be fine. Have any of you been in relationships like that? The assumption that the absence of communication means that everything is fine works, sort of, provided nobody else is communicating with the other person either, right? So your assumption that a customer who is passive, because they're passive to you, that they're also passive to your competitors, that's what's wrong, right? So they correspond to the passives. They're the customers or the people in your relationships where you're in the deadly zone of mutual indifference. Someone else smiles at one of them. Your competitor smiles at your passives. Your competitor smiles at your passives whose comments you have never even looked at, right? Because you only look at the detractors and maybe the promoters, right? By definition, these people are indifferent to choosing you or choosing your competitor. If your competitor is not indifferent to them, they're going to be history. Does that make sense to you? So here's what this meant in numbers for this particular business that lost 15 NPS points over a 3-year period and had a revenue decline that was in line with the model that I showed you before. So first, 2 points on this. First, the observation was, as we tried to recover from detractors, we lost margins with them, right? A surprising thing happened at the other end, which is that, well, it surprised me. Promoters were more willing to pay the full price and not negotiate discounts. They're happy, give me more, right? And the passives were somewhere in between. No surprises there. That corresponds to NPS theory. The surprise is here. And for us, yeah, passives were about 40% of all of the customers. So this business had a 7.7% annual. So at the end of the 3-year period, the revenue had declined by 7.7%, right? During that period, it had gone up slightly with the promoters. It had stayed flat with the detractors because we did a fantastic job of recovering them. Meanwhile, IBM, whoever, others just came along and gave flowers to our passives, and they were gone, and we didn't even know it was happening, right? So this to me, and as is there, it's a business that was over $15 billion annually. So this, this matters, right? So my belief is that that logic applies to any business that has competitors and depends on annual contract renewals. We tend not, salespeople in particular, will tend not to pay any attention to the people in the passive category until it's coming up to the contract renewal time, right? This was recognized in the software industry as an issue first. I mean, my message here is, continuous two-way communication with the passives, just like in couples in the deadly zone of mutual indifference, is critical. In the software industry, which tends, this is a dangerous thing to say in front of software customers, which tends to have a lot of money, the answer has been to implement customer success teams. The customer success role is to make certain that the person knows how to use the software and gets the ROI that we agreed in principle that they would get. So software industry implemented it first. I've helped a large global commercial real estate company to do the same thing, where they would get multi-year contracts by the nature of the business they were in, and then they occasionally got surprises from customers who had never escalated, who weren't references, and then suddenly they're saying, nah, we're not going to renew with you. So, and a feature of customer success teams, as if you're doing it in the pure model, is the customer success people have no sales incentive of any kind, and the customers are not charged for them, right? So they're not supposed to interfere with you. So I'm convinced that this applies in consumer businesses with renewable contracts. I do not have practical personal experience of trying to do this with, I'm just making this up, a fitness center. So is this surprising to you? Couples, This is all, we're 2/3 of the way through the couples therapy here. So, okay. So, no, you're fine. We need to talk about one more thing, which is the nature of the communication that we're talking about. So I've said we need continuous communication. So what is this? I'm an engineer, so I have a particular form of communication, which I only discovered was highly defective quite late in my career. Anybody from Oracle here, or who has worked for Oracle in the past? Well, okay, one. I know there's a second one. So Mark Hurd, I'm not going to say he's my buddy, but he answers my emails and he doesn't answer yours. So CEO of Oracle. He was the CEO of HP at one point, and at a particular time, I was head of customer experience for EMEA and the chief of staff for the EMEA leadership team. And I was organizing all of the business reviews that we would have. And then Mark would come over. Those who, Mark, you're not listening? He's not a nice person. But I think he's quite proud of that. But he gave us a lunchtime tip or speech that I found quite intriguing. And that was, he said, look, I've been communicating HP's strategy for a while, or doing my best, and I've found that I'm doing something that doesn't work. He said, because his fundamental strategy was, he said, we need to save, and I don't remember the precise number, I'm going to say $5 billion, so that I can spend $5 billion on hiring more sales and sales support people. He said, the first rule of selling is you have to show up. And we don't have enough sales and sales support people to show up to all of the deals that are out there. So he said, I made it a very strict practice that when I would talk to any audience, that I would spend half the time on what we were going to do with the money and encourage people about how if we have double the number of salespeople, which was the goal, that it's reasonably realistic that over time you're going to get double the amount of selling done. And half the time on where we were going to have fewer people, fewer buildings, and pay our suppliers less to find the $5 billion, right? And then he started to go out of the room, and then he'd go, Adam, what did I just talk about? And Adam would typically say, you talked about cost reductions and layoffs. Right? Did I talk about anything else? I don't really remember, right? So Mark was doing something which was communicating in this way that was intensely rational. He was talking in what we would talk very scientific basis of thing. We're talking about numbers and data. Now I'm going to say something which is going to sound almost opposite to what Adam said earlier today in a moment, but we'll get past that because we actually do agree. And Mark's initial supposition was that by just talking about this intensely rational stuff, he could stimulate action. But what was actually going on was people were making up their own stories, creating their own set of emotion, and creating a set of motivation and actions that were different from what Mark expected, right? How many people in the room, show of hands, since I haven't been able to get a large number of hands, I'm going to try this time. How many people in the room believe that homeopathy works? Okay. How many people in the room believe that acupuncture works? How many people in the room believe that vaccines cause autism? How many people in the room? Now, those were quite serious questions. I'm going to go somewhat less serious, except for some people in the room, unfortunately. How many people in the room believe that all Mexicans are drug dealers, murderers, and rapists, and that we need a wall on the southern border to build them out, right? The point is that everybody who believes any of those four things has been communicated to in this method that's on the screen now. I used to believe homeopathy worked, because why? Because I gave stuff to my children and it felt better. I did not know at the time that in double-blind clinical testing that the effect of the pills and of pure sugar pills is identical. When I believed in acupuncture and my ex-wife had it so to stop smoking, I did not know that in random tests where you insert the needles randomly or in the ideal points, that the result is identical. So I believed the stories, I had the emotion, I believed modern medicine was wrong and so on, and that the traditional medicine from the ages when people didn't live to the age of 30 were better, right? Because to me, the stories and the emotion, the competition, and this is deliberately shown a little bit smaller on the science line, stories and emotion are much more powerful than your data is, right? So if you are going to, and if any of you have read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow book, or Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational, these are foundation behavioral economics books. Daniel Kahneman talks about this in terms of system 1. So system 1 is the part of our brains that works through at the emotional level, bases on stories, generates the emotion, and operates really, really quickly. System 2 is the more rational part of our minds that works on the very scientific basis. Now, what all of Kahneman's research showed, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics based on his work on what's called prospect theory that includes this, is that once system 1 has made up its mind, system 2 doesn't engage at all, right? So once I have made up my mind that all the Mexicans are dangerous, I'm not actually going to look at the crime statistics that show that the immigrant Mexicans commit fewer crimes than the people who are already in the United States. Because I know that can't be right, because my landlady's second cousin's best friend had a Mexican drug dealer who lived next door to them, So the actual ratio between the two areas is like this. And this is critically important when you're communicating in the area of customer experience. I've seen there's at least one person from security software company here. Others with security software experience, a few. So I used to go into the security software leadership team and say, here's what I've learned from all of the double-blind benchmarking compared to all of the other security products. Here's what we're learning from the other pieces of research and so on. Therefore, here are the projects that we need to work on to address all of these issues. And guess what? No money, no people. Right? No project, right? You don't have the people, you don't have the money, you're not going to have the project done. I read Kahneman and Ariely's stuff too late. And I tried on the following quarter, and I was in the security leadership team. I said, fine. And this was I took a stock image photo, but the story was a real one. And the stock image photo was a male executive who was looking like they were just about to start crying. So it was the first slide in my presentation, and it said, meet Jan Kovacs. We lost his data. He lost his job. And it was true, right? Suddenly, everybody was interested. Now, if you're going to work in that type of manipulative way, where you're going to tell the story that generates the emotion, if you're a CX professional, you'd better be backed up by the data that you've got on the other side, right? So you want to be very selective about it, and tell the stories that are backed up by that. One way that I'm going to suggest you to actually do it is, ta-da! I've found this really effective. When I said, look, I'm going to be presenting on needs to a 1,000-person sales conference in Las Vegas. You, the CEO of Sony Ericsson, you've expressed some needs. You, the CIO of ST Micro and the CTO of BBVA, big Spanish bank. I'd like to come with a film crew into your location. I'll give you a magic wand that has total power over HP. Make 3 wishes. I'll do my best to make them happen for you. Recorded it. Unbelievably powerful way of going into account reviews and so on. The point is, ideally, if you can have the story and the emotion be generated by the customer and not by you as the CX professional, that's going to be even more powerful. Anyway, other than a small closing message, that's actually pretty much all that I want to say. This is your role. My brother had done this drawing, and I noticed the guy at the front looked like he might have a magic wand. So I said, hey, as the customer experience leader, you want to lead that charge into emotion and generate the stories that will support your vision. So we've got a few minutes for a couple of questions, and then I've got a closing remark.
Thank you. I now understand your point.